Every life is a story. Some stories fade away with time, while others live on forever. Today, we remember those American figures who have left an indelible mark through their life's journey. Their contributions, sacrifices, and lives are an eternal source of inspiration for us. Let us revisit their stories and honor their memories. Joan Plowright, English actress of dazzling versatility, dies at 95. She was blessed, a critic wrote, with unrivaled capacity for earthy truthfulness and emotional honesty. Joan Plowright, an English actress whose marriage to Laurence Olivier conferred on her instant rank among the theatrical nobility, and who carved her own considerable and singular place on the British stage, died January 16 at a retirement home in Northwood, England. She was 95. The family announced the death but did not provide a cause. Miss Plowright retired in 2014 because of macular degeneration that had left her blind. Miss Plowright studied at the Old Vic Theatre School in London, a short-lived, much-celebrated training ground that shaped a post-war generation of actors and was heralded as one of the brightest and most naturally expressive actresses of the era. She was blessed, arts critic Michael Billington later wrote in the London Guardian, with unrivaled capacity for earthy truthfulness and emotional honesty. With her husky voice and flirty brown eyes, she brought a saucy charisma to 17th-century Restoration comedy and a sprightly vitality to contemporary dramas by playwrights as disparate as Arthur Miller, Anton Chekhov, and Eugene Ionesco. She became enduringly identified with John Osborne's The Entertainer and Sheila Delaney's A Taste of Honey, both seminal plays of the taboo-shattering kitchen sink realism that was in vogue in the 1950s. The protagonists of kitchen sink realism, anti-heroes prone to aimlessness or violence, were working-class Britons who spoke in colloquial, sometimes vulgar language, and who became vehicles for subject matter that was shocking to theatergoers of the era. At the vanguard of the movement were directors Tony Richardson and Lindsay Anderson, writers Arnold Wesker and Anne Jellicoe, and actors Alan Bates and Rachel Roberts, all of whom coalesced around the English Stage Co. at London's Royal Court Theatre. Proudly ensconced at what she called the rebel outpost, Ms. Plowright said she and her colleagues were determined to stage a pitchfork rebellion against the polite British theatre that had long reflected upper-middle-class tastes, an establishment sensibility in many ways personified by Sir Larry Olivier, the most acclaimed Shakespearean actor of his generation. Fearing that he was past his prime, Olivier charmed Osborne, author of Look Back in Anger and other works featuring brutal protagonists, into writing a showcase play that might reinvigorate his standing. The result was The Entertainer, 1957, about a third-rate music hall comedian and all-around louse named Archie Rice. Miss Plowright played his worshipful daughter. Off-stage, she was besotted by his extraordinary good looks and artistic imagination. Both were married, she to actor Roger Gage, he to the glamorous but tormented movie and stage star Vivien Leigh, who suffered from bipolar disorder. Recalling the early days of their relationship, Miss Plowright later described being touched by the bleakness in his face when he wasn't acting or flirting. They were inseparable as they performed The Entertainer on Broadway in 1958 and on screen in 1960. Miss Plowright was quickly subsumed into Olivier's social and professional orbit, but maintained a richly varied career of her own. She went on to star on stage in A Taste of Honey, playing a cynical adolescent who becomes pregnant by a black sailor and battles her alternately suffocating and neglectful mother. She earned the 1961 Tony Award for Best Actress during its Broadway run, but left the cast soon after her marriage to Olivier that March. She said she tried to bring ballast to his restless life, raising their 3 children at the cost of her professional momentum. We didn't want all the legend stuff. He had had it and didn't want it any longer, and I had never had it and didn't like it anyway. She told the British publication TV Times, "I married a man, not a myth." At the Chichester Festival in 1962 and 1963, she had appeared in her husband's acclaimed productions of Chekhov's Uncle Vanya and George Bernard Shaw's St. Joan, 2 plays that had helped launch the National Theatre Co. with Olivier as founder and artistic director. In the 1970s, she starred in two long-running hit comedies in London, The Bed Before Yesterday and Philomena, the first directed by Anderson, the second by her husband. The few movie roles she accepted at the time included Sonia in a 1963 version of Uncle Vanya, opposite Olivier as Dr. Astrov and Michael Redgrave in the title role. Masha in Olivier's 1970 screen adaptation of Chekhov's Three Sisters. The disturbing mother in Equus, a 1977 drama from Peter Shaffer's play, and a prim seamstress looking after her sexually awakened teenage niece in The Dressmaker, 1988, based on a novel by Beryl Bainbridge. Her role in Enchanted April, 1991, as a proper Briton with literary pretensions vacationing in Italy, earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Marisa Tomei won the honor for the comedy My Cousin Vinny, but Enchanted April was a turning point in Ms. Plowright's previously rare cinematic outings. She began to lend her prestige and her well-rounded vowels to films such as The Scarlet Letter, 1995, starring Demi Moore, director Franco Zeffirelli's Jane Eyre, 1996, with Charlotte Gainsbourg, Tea with Mussolini, 1999, opposite fellow English grande dames Judi Dench and Maggie Smith, and Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont, 2005, as the lonely retiree who befriends a much younger man, Rupert Friend. In Last Action Hero, 1993, Miss Plowright made a jesting appearance as a Hamlet-loving schoolteacher who shows her class a clip of her late husband Olivier's movie version of the play. A daydreaming student imagines a weaponized Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Shakespearean drama, declaring, "Hey, Claudius, you killed my father. Big mistake." Joan Ann Plowright was born October 28, 1929, in Brigg and raised in Scunthorpe, localities in England's industrial Midlands, where her father was a newspaper editor. Her stage-struck mother, who was involved in amateur theater productions, encouraged her three children to perform. Miss Plowright said she always felt total confidence on stage. "I liked disappearing into a character," she told the Associated Press. At 14, 15, I probably had more confidence on stage than I had off. I knew I could make people laugh and make them cry. I could make people look at me with more interest. She won a scholarship to the Drama School of the Old Vic Theatre in London and was a stock company player with provincial repertory companies before Orson Welles selected her as the only woman in the cast of his 1955 staging of Moby Dick Rehearsed, in which she was cast in the unlikely role of Captain Ahab's black cabin boy, Pip. The next year, she joined the nascent English Stage Co. In one of the company's rare departures from contemporary drama, she impressed critics as the seductive and wily Marjorie Pinchwife in William Wycherley's 17th-century restoration comedy, The Country Wife. In 1958, Ms. Plowright debuted on Broadway under the direction of Richardson in an Ionesco double bill, portraying an old crone in The Chairs, billed as a tragic farce, and a schoolgirl in The Lesson, a comic drama. Months later, she was back on Broadway reprising her Royal Court performance as Jean Rice in The Entertainer. She returned to England in the title role of Shaw's Major Barbara, then gave an audacious comic performance as a murderous wife in Hook, Line, and Sinker, Robert Morley's adaptation of a French comedy by André Roussin. And so Miss Plowright went on for years, whisking from play to play with thunderous applause at each disappearance into her characters. As a farmer's daughter who yearns for a life beyond her station in Wesker's roots, Miss Plowright channeled rage and sympathy into an indelible performance. She reunited with her husband at the Royal Court in 1960, under Welles's direction, in an ecstatically reviewed staging of Ionesco's Rhinoceros, but spent the remainder of her stage career mostly with the National Theatre Co., which Olivier spent the better part of a decade building into an institution. By all accounts, including his own, Olivier was a joyfully mischievous but difficult controlling man, prone to bouts of political backstabbing. He held a bitter grudge against director Peter Hall, who supplanted him at the helm of the National Theatre in the early 1970s. Olivier complicated his marriage with affairs, including a dalliance with 20-year-old actress Sarah Miles soon after Miss Plowright gave birth to her first child. Olivier, Lord Olivier, thanks to a life peerage in 1970, died in 1989 at 82. Survivors include their 3 children, Richard, Tamsin, and Julie Kate. One of her brothers, the late David Plowright, was longtime chairman of Granada Television. Miss Plowright, who was made a dame in 2003, acted as keeper of the Olivier flame amid a flurry of biographies that exhumed details of his reported bisexuality and Olivier's wounding remarks about their marital separation. Joan expected me to die when I was 70. Unfortunately, I didn't. She wrote a memoir, And That's Not All, 2001. She earned an Emmy Award nomination for her performance in the HBO film Stalin, 1992, as the Soviet tyrant's mother-in-law. Explaining her forays into low-end comedies, among them Dennis the Menace, 1993, with Walter Matthau, and Bringing Down the House, 2003, opposite Steve Martin and Queen Latifah, she told the Sunday Telegraph of London, "Now and again, it's very liberating to be a bit silly and kick your heels up." Off-camera, she displayed little if any pretense and went out of her way to put younger actors at ease. "People know I was Lady Olivier," she told the Associated Press, referring to the title she received by virtue of her marriage to Lord Olivier. "People say, 'Your ladyship.' They were addressing me that way. It was a lot to get through, so I just said, 'My name is Joan, and I came here to work.'" Carol Downer, a founder of the women's health movement, dies at 91. A self-described housewife turned feminist activist, she helped lead the women's health movement in the 1970s. Carol Downer, a self-described housewife turned feminist activist who helped lead the women's health movement in the 1970s, mobilizing women to take charge of their bodies and popularizing a controversial method of at-home abortion known as menstrual extraction, died January 13 at a hospital in Glendale, California. She was 91. She had suffered a heart attack 2 weeks before her death, said her daughter Angela Booth. Ms. Downer was a mother of 6 doing part-time clerical work when she became involved in the feminist movement in California in the late 1960s. She was not new to activism, having previously participated in the movements for racial equality and Chicano rights and demonstrations against the Vietnam War. But second-wave feminism, galvanized by the 1963 publication of Betty Friedan's manifesto, The Feminine Mystique, awakened in Miss Downer a political commitment that would propel her for much of the rest of her life. In particular, she became convinced of the then revolutionary notion that women should take control of their health. Widely regarded at the time as the purview of mainly male physicians, for Miss Downer and many other activists in the feminist movement, a critical aspect of women's health was reproductive control. In the early 1960s, a decade before the U.S. Supreme Court established a constitutional right to abortion in Roe v. Wade in 1973, Miss Downer had undergone an illegal abortion. "It was quite a searing experience," she told Miss Magazine in 2022. "Better than most women's as a matter of fact, but life-changing as far as my attitudes toward the subject." In 1969, Ms. Downer joined the abortion committee of a local chapter of the National Organization for Women. She began observing the work of an underground abortion provider, Harvey Carman, who was not a medical doctor and whose practices Ms. Downer did not find entirely responsible, but who was credited with developing a suction device that made early pregnancy abortions simpler and less painful. Along with her fellow committee members, Ms. Downer became persuaded that women, even those without formal medical training, could be taught to safely perform the procedure on each other at home in the early weeks of pregnancy. Another activist, Lorraine Rothman, perfected the device, which consisted of flexible tubes, a jar and a syringe, and was used to perform the procedure known as menstrual extraction. Absent a pregnancy, it could also be used to reduce the length of a woman's period. Seeking to recruit participants to the abortion rights cause, Ms. Downer and her fellow organizers held a meeting at a women's bookstore in Venice, California. Ms. Downer was tasked with presenting the device and explaining how it was used. As she spoke, Ms. Downer recalled in an oral history for the Veteran Feminists of America, she saw that some of the women were practically fainting at her description of suctioning the contents of a uterus. The thought occurred to her that if she could show how the device worked in the female anatomy, it would be less intimidating. In an office located off the sitting area where the women had gathered, Miss Downer positioned herself on a table, pulled up her dress, inserted a speculum into her body, and showed her cervix to any member of the audience who wished to see it. "I had no idea what was going to happen next," she recounted. "Maybe they would think I was an exhibitionist or that this whole meeting was a secret recruitment for some kind of weird stuff. They didn't think anything like that," she continued. "I was imparting my knowledge to them, and they shared their knowledge, and suddenly we were creating new knowledge based on our experiences and observation." Over the years, menstrual extraction has drawn criticism from some abortion rights supporters who have argued that it is unsafe for women to undergo medical procedures without the supervision of trained professionals. In 1992, a Planned Parenthood medical officer described the procedure as a regression to the bad old days of back-alley abortions. Ms. Downer, who insisted that the risks of menstrual extraction were exceedingly low, regarded it a key component of what became known as self-help in women's health. With Rothman, she co-founded the Los Angeles Feminist Women's Health Center, which instructed women in gynecologic self-examinations, among other aspects of healthcare. Ms. Downer later led the Federation of Feminist Women's Health Centers, with clinics across the country. What they did by introducing gynecological self-exams was very revolutionary at the time. Feminist activist and writer Barbara Ehrenreich told the Los Angeles Times when Rothman died in 2007. "They said it was not a dark secret. You can look at yourself. It's no big deal." It had a big effect on all of us feminists who were interested in healthcare. Miss Downer's women's health work in the 1970s coincided with the widespread readership of Our Bodies, Ourselves, a pioneering guide to women's health that was first published in 1970 and became a perennial bestseller. Billie Y. Avery, the founder of what is now the Black Women's Health Imperative, attended a speech by Ms. Downer in Florida in the early 1970s and said that it helped move her to activism. She recalled that Ms. Downer traveled with a box of speculums labeled toys, so the contents would not attract notice. However provocative it may have been for Ms. Downer to demonstrate her anatomy, Avery said that it gave women permission to learn about our bodies. "The more knowledge we had of our bodies," she added, "we could take better care. We could be active participants in our health care rather than passive receivers." Carolyn Arilla Chatham was born in Shawnee, Oklahoma, on October 9, 1933, and grew up in Glendale, California. Her father was a gas company clerk during the Depression. Both of her parents eventually worked in real estate. She attended the University of California at Los Angeles, but got married and left school to have her first child at 19. "Being a young housewife with several small children, circumstances pushed me to change," Ms. Downer told the Veteran Feminists of America, explaining her decision to join the women's movement. "I just kept on being this nice woman who was polite and helpful and constructive and involved in the community," she continued. "Finally, I sank deeper and deeper into this depression until I was just in very bad shape. And thank goodness there was an upsurge of feminism going on around me. At some point, it clicked. One huge click. I realized that if I didn't take some action, I was going down." In 1972, Ms. Downer was found not guilty after being charged with practicing medicine without a license when she saw a patient at her health clinic in Los Angeles and suggested the application of yogurt for the treatment of a vaginal infection. She argued that yogurt was an old home remedy and remarked, "Would they have been so upset if I had looked at her throat and recommended a hot salt water gargle?" In 1977, she was convicted of trespassing when, along with other activists, she entered a Tallahassee hospital and performed what they described as a consumer inspection of a maternity ward whose practices they deemed objectionable. Ms. Downer was the author, with Rebecca Chalker, of A Woman's Book of Choices, Abortion, Menstrual Extraction, RU 486, published in 1992. RU 486 is a drug used to end early pregnancies. In the 1980s, Ms. Downer resumed her higher education and graduated from Whittier Law School in Costa Mesa, California, in 1991. She practiced mainly immigration and employment law, said her daughter. Ms. Downer's marriage to Earl Wallace Brown ended in divorce. Her second husband, Frank Downer, whom she married in 1965, died in 2012. Survivors include 3 children from her first marriage, Laura Brown, Shelby Coleman, and David Brown, 2 children from her second marriage, Angela Booth and Frank Downer Jr., and numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A daughter from her first marriage, Victoria Siegel, died in 2021. Ms. Downer told Ms. Magazine that she found the 2022 Supreme Court ruling in the Dobbs case, which overturned the abortion protections enshrined in Roe v. Wade, to be shattering. Reflecting on her work, Judy Norsijan, one of the original authors of Our Bodies, Ourselves, wrote in an email that Ms. Downer understood early on that access to safe abortion could always be compromised by laws and restrictions. Her goal, Norsijan added, had been to help prepare women. Heinz Klutmeier, who photographed defining moments for SI, dies at 82. As a photographer for Sports Illustrated, he captured scenes of triumph and agony, including in classic shots of swimmer Michael Phelps and the Miracle on Ice. Heinz Klutmeier, a Sports Illustrated photographer who, while positioning himself in the right place at the right time and pushing the technical bounds of his medium, took some of the defining pictures of sport's biggest moments, including Lynn Swann's acrobatic catch in Super Bowl X, the U.S. hockey team's triumph in the Miracle on Ice, and swimmer Michael Phelps's hairbreadth victory at the 2008 Olympics, died January 14 at his home studio in Manhattan. He was 82. The cause was complications from Parkinson's disease and a stroke, said his daughter Jessica Klutmeier. A German-born photographer who came to the United States at age 9, Mr. Klutmeier began freelancing for the Associated Press as a teenager, stalking the sidelines at Green Bay Packers games near his family's home in Milwaukee. He went on to shoot for Sports Illustrated for nearly 50 years, taking more than 150 cover photos and documenting virtually every major sporting event, including almost all of the Olympic Games held between 1972 and 2012. Mr. Klutmeier, pronounced Klutmeier, shot generations of American swimming stars, beginning with 9-time Olympic champion Mark Spitz, and used remote-controlled cameras to document every turn and straightaway at the Kentucky Derby. He photographed Super Bowls, speed skating showdowns, NBA Finals, and World Series games, and he showed a singular talent for crafting unexpected portraits, including in underwater pictures he took of Phelps in 2005, recreating the swimmer's University of Michigan dorm room, complete with a desk, easy chair, and Apple computer, at the bottom of a pool. In a tribute for Sports Illustrated, senior writer John Wertheim wrote that Mr. Klutmeier didn't take photos. He gave photos, putting into the public domain visual gems that told stories, evoked feelings, memorialized events, and sometimes, literally, reset limits of possibility. Under pressure from his father, who didn't think photography was a viable career, Mr. Klutmeier studied engineering at Dartmouth College and worked for a year at Inland Steel in Chicago. He later drew on his technical background while finding new ways to shoot athletes in action, experimenting with novel lighting techniques and split-shot lenses. Frustrated by the dim lighting at indoor football games, he helped pioneer the use of strobe lights at domed stadiums like the Superdome in New Orleans. Working at a time when heavy 40-pound strobes needed to be connected to cameras by cables, he used the devices to take dramatic photos of the 1981 Sugar Bowl, capturing Georgia running back Herschel Walker running into the end zone as a soft, almost celestial light emanated from above. Mr. Klutmeier later became the first photographer to capture Olympic athletes with an underwater camera, diving to the bottom of the pool to set up a remote-operated device at the 1992 Barcelona Games. His plans for an underwater shoot were nearly scuttled when an armed security guard mistook the camera for a bomb. Mr. Klutmeier, who had been a varsity swimmer in high school, was able to persuade the pool director to keep the camera in place. "I will wear a swimming suit to the pool," he recalled saying, "and if there's a problem, I will jump in and pull it out." The resulting pictures included a fish-eye view of swimmer Mel Stewart, setting an Olympic record in the 200-meter butterfly with the scoreboard visible outside the pool. As other sports photographers followed his lead in working underwater, Mr. Klootmeyer continued to look for new ways to shoot. He said he spent a year preparing for the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, developing methods that allowed him to capture 8 frames a second with a camera that could be kept underwater for days, connected to the surface through a live feed. The images were stunning. Aided by his assistant Jeff Kavanaugh, who donned scuba gear to position the camera, Mr. Klootmeyer took photos that offered a frame-by-frame view of Phelps's narrow comeback victory in the 100-meter butterfly, when an extra half-stroke enabled the American to beat Serbia's Milorad Čović by 0.01 seconds. "It is a techie's delight and photographer's dream," Mr. Klootmeyer told Sports Illustrated, discussing his underwater setup. He also acknowledged that it was a pain to get everything in place. Jeff probably spent 40 minutes underwater just to move the camera less than an inch. Mr. Klootmeyer was used to going out of his way to get the perfect shot. At the 1980 Winter Olympic Games in Lake Placid, New York, he set up 2 remote cameras in the rafters in the lead-up to the U.S. hockey team's come-from-behind victory over the Soviet Union, which was heavily favored after winning 4 straight gold medals. Klootmeyer spent much of the game in an elevated area for photographers, looking down on the ice, according to the sports website Deadspin. Midway through the third period, he moved closer to the action, finding a space where he could fit players and spectators inside the frame. As the United States scored 2 unanswered goals, Mr. Klootmeyer continued to shoot with his Nikon F1, capturing the pandemonium that ensued after Team USA held on for a 4-3 victory. His image of the players celebrating, mobbing U.S. goalie Jim Craig as a fan waved an American flag in the background, became one of the rare Sports Illustrated cover photos to appear without a headline or accompanying text. In 2014, readers voted it the most iconic cover in the magazine's 60-year history. Technique and technical stuff are absolutely irrelevant to the picture in terms of what you do as a photographer. Mr. Klootmeyer once said, according to a biography from the Lucy Awards, which honored him in 2007 with its Sports Photography Prize, "I think the most important thing is to have a vision, to have an emotional feeling, to care about what you're photographing, and to have something that's already there in your heart, in your eye." The younger of 2 sons, Heinz Klootmeyer was born in Berlin on October 1942 and grew up in Bremen in northwest Germany. His father had been drafted into the German Air Force and was captured by the British while stationed on the Italian coast during World War II. He was sent to the United States, where he spent about 3 years at a prisoner of war camp in Tennessee. "Being a POW probably saved his life," Mr. Klootmeyer told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. After the war, the family settled in Milwaukee, where Mr. Klootmeyer's father worked as a typesetter and printer, later coaching tennis and teaching German. Mr. Klootmeyer's mother became a teletype operator for the Associated Press. She spurred his interest in photography after a picture she took of him at age 13, playing with his pet parakeet Chirpy while homesick with the flu, was picked up by the AP and ran in newspapers around the country. Using a Nikon S his parents bought for him, Mr. Klootmeyer began working as a stringer. He received a bachelor's degree from Dartmouth in 1965, and after his short-lived engineering career, became a full-time photographer, taking pictures for the Milwaukee Journal before joining the staff of Time Inc. in 1969, with assignments at Sports Illustrated as well as Life magazine. Mr. Klootmeyer served 2 stints as Sports Illustrated's director of photography before retiring from the magazine in 2016. In 2017, he became the first photographer to be inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame. His marriage to Donna Orlandi ended in divorce. In addition to their daughter Jessica, who worked as his assistant before becoming a photographer in her own right, she once shot Roger Federer for the cover of SI. Survivors include 2 other daughters from his marriage, Erica and Tina Klootmeyer, a daughter from another relationship, Kirsten Schmidt, a brother, and 4 grandchildren. Mr. Klootmeyer liked to drive a motorcycle between assignments, especially when he was covering the Olympics. After getting his pilot's license in the 1960s, He traveled longer distances by flying a single-engine Grumman Tiger. In the predigital era, it allowed him to quickly transport his pictures to editors. In 1987, he had to make an emergency landing after running into engine trouble shortly after takeoff. Traveling north along the Hudson River, he spotted a relatively flat patch of land, a former landfill in Croton-on-Hudson, New York, and circled 4 times before making his descent. The resulting crash bent the plane's left wing, threw the right wheel 20 feet from the plane, broke a rear window, and twisted the plane's propeller, the local